Welcome to Books and Brews Light. We are on our 30th episode of Books and Brews Light. In addition to, I believe we are on the 60th episode of our regular podcast. And so this is our 90th author we have interviewed. And I'm excited to bring you from Australia, Alice Cadd. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Alice, I wanted to just start by having you introduce yourself and your book.
Oh, my name's Alice Cadd, and I'm a psychiatrist from Australia. I've been working in psychiatry since 1989 was my first term in psychiatry. And I've loved my time working in mental health. And I decided to write a book. So my book is Death in the Red Dirt. And it's a psychological thriller, and it's set in northeastern Australia, and it's about a mental health retreat where people use psychedelics, and somebody dies. And I'm very interested in really promoting two things. Firstly, a respect for people who have mental health challenges, as well as our own mental health issues. But secondly, I want to talk about how beautiful that part of Australia is and how important conservation is.
Wonderful. I'm assuming, given that you're a psychiatrist and your book is about a mental health retreat and a psychiatrist, that it's inspired by your own work, or what inspired the specific story?
Oh, and no, thankfully, I am not like the psychiatrist up there.
The clients aren't dropping dead.
No, look, it was a little bit. I work in a more vulnerable area in Western Australia where people are poorer. And there's a big movement in psychiatry where people are looking at using psychedelics treats mental health. Now, what I've found with my patients is they can't afford the treatments. The treatments are ridiculous. I'm sure it's the same in your part.
Definitely.
It's $30,000. So what they were doing was they were buying this stuff on the internet and taking it. And I wanted to bring up the fact that, yes, there's good in medication. There's good in stuff that you can take, but there's also problems and potential side effects. So I wanted to talk about that. So that was why. And I also wanted to share my respect for people who have mental health problems. Well, we all do. So we all have our own vulnerabilities. And I guess what I wanted to say was in our vulnerabilities, we have a lot of strength. We all do. No, there isn't anyone out there who gets off scot-free. I have my own vulnerability to depression, but in depression, I have strengths of being empathetic and being able to listen to people and kindness. And I really value that. And so that's where it sort of originated.
Okay. And so you brought all these people together in this mental health retreat. Somebody dies, and the question is, did the psychiatrist do it? And if so, was it deliberate?
Well, yeah. Was it accidental? Was it deliberate? How did the person die? And also so it's a closed circle. They talk about Agatha Christie in the closed circle. So somebody did do something, and it's trying to figure out who and why is the question. So I have not written a police procedural at all. It's very much the characters and what they're like as people, and I'm very pleased. It's been well received. People have enjoyed reading it.
That's great. And it's your first book, right?
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, I've just about finished my second, so I'm powering on.
Will it be the same protagonist? Like, will it be a police series? Not a police, but the investigator?
No, actually, the investigator is in it, but it's from a different perspective. So the second book is actually, I want a theme, firstly looking at that area of the world, which is just so beautiful. So we go camping up there every, a couple of times a year. So I've swum with the whale sharks. I've actually heard humpback whales singing on the beach.
Oh, that is exciting.
Yeah, I've swum with octopuses that are 1 meter long and watched them build their little houses on the bottom of the ocean. And so I wanted to write in that area of the world. But I also, I am interested in mental health and mental health issues from a very positive viewpoint, not negative.
Right. Well, I think you're right when you say that we all have our issues,
We do.
whatever you call it, whether you call it mental health, or we all just, as I say, have our quirks, we all have our ups and downs, and hopefully we're working toward more ups. Did you end up having to do a lot of research, since much of the book centers around your profession? What things did you have to research?
I look, to be honest with you, I took to psychiatry like a duck to water in 1989. So I know this stuff. This stuff just comes out of me now. I would say, no, I've lived it. So I've lived the mental health. I've lived being in that part of the world. So I'm, no, I feel like I really knew what I was talking about.
That makes it easier. See, my books were set in medieval Scotland, and I have not been to medieval Scotland. I have not been a medieval warrior, so I had a little more research to do. I was kind of curious. The reason I asked, though, is because they always do say, write what you know. But in my experience, you can't know everything about all the characters. So I know trombone really well. I know the world of orchestral music, and that's a huge part of my books. But a medieval warrior, that took a lot more work. Did you, what about learning the writing craft? Did
now
you
that,
study in class?
Yes, I did. I actually did quite a number of classes and enjoyed that. And in fact, one of my purposes in this that's just personal is there's a lot of Alzheimer's dementia in my family. So when I was coming towards retirement, I wanted to sit down and think, how am I going to keep my busy brain active? So I've spent my whole life talking to people. I have 1,000 people on my book, so I know so many stories from people. But what am I going to do when I don't do that anymore? How do I? Now, I am not a quilter. I'd love to be able to quilt, but I can't. And but I am a really strong reader. So my whole life, I probably read 2 books a week.
Wow.
So books a year. I have a huge appetite for books, and I read everything. So I read nonfiction, fiction, and so I thought, oh no, I'll write something. And yes, it was really interesting, a completely different way of using my brain. I actually have done research, so I've had quite a few academic papers published on hearing voices. So I was interested in the experience of hearing voices in PTSD and comparing it to people who hear voices in schizophrenia. But this is totally different to academic writing.
Yes, it would be. Like, it has to be
so
interesting. Right?
It's just so different. And it made me laugh when I started. So I was in a group for a year of about 20 of us. It was a write your novel. And only about, 2 of us wrote a novel, but it was really wonderful because you put your writing up there and people would criticize it. Now, the one thing you learn in academics is to be very good at accepting criticism. You get lots of criticism. You don't have to worry about that.
Yes.
And I actually really enjoyed it. And initially, I was quite stilted in how I wrote because that was what I was taught. And what they taught me was to write like a human being. And I got into the fun of it. I really started to enjoy the flow and the fun of it.
Right. So does this mean that you're a plotter or a pantser?
I started off definitely a pantser, and I'm afraid my nature is very much pantser. But what I've learned with a bit of experience, and definitely in my second book, is you need the importance of plotting. So the first one,
at least a little, right?
Yeah. So the first one, I sort of whacked it out, but then if you do that, you have to do a hell of a lot of editing. And I found with this next one, I'm more familiar with the flow of a story. And so I'm more able to think, this is where I'm going, and this is how I want to put it together.
Did you study specifically writing mysteries? To me, I'm actually starting on a mystery series now, and I find it very different. You have to plant these clues, but you can't be too obvious. And because you know in your head what's happening, how do you approach that problem?
For me, it was all in the edit. So I wrote it, read it, and then I would go back and think, okay, I need this here to make sense of this there. And so I got the overall structure, but then I went back in and put in a hidden structure into it. I don't necessarily recommend that. Very clever people have it all planned at the start. It's just, it's not my strength.
I'm kind of happy with how I've managed it, but I'm in the process, the part of the plan where I set it aside and go back to it a few months later and see, does it still make sense and not too obvious when it's not fresh in my mind. Do you have a reading ready for us?
Yes, I do. Okay, my main character is Maya. Maya woke with a start. Her right arm throbbed. There was a burning sensation in her fingers, and she flicked them. She flicked the feeling. The bladder ached. She had a desperate urge to pee. She stumbled into the corridor and made her way to the toilet. The house appeared deserted. The smell of sweat of dozens of people was all around her, but they'd gone. They'd forgotten her. A stabbing pain hit her in the stomach and she gasped. She rushed to the sink and tried to vomit, but nothing came. She settled on a sip of lukewarm tap water. Maya hated being alone in any house. The creaks and cracks amplified, sounding as if a murderer hid behind every door. She went back to her room and looked at the clock. 3 p.m. She'd slept for hours. Her skin prickled at the thought of being abandoned, a primitive fear of waking the demons when alone. The house had old bones and groaned like an elderly woman trying to move on a hot day. Maya chided herself, get something to eat. You're just hungry. The fear will pass. She left the room and walked down the corridor to the mouth. She shuddered at the large windows in full view of any killer lurking outside. She curled herself forward and shuffled across the open area. Her heart raced. Oh God, was someone watching her? She held her body stiff and tight, trying to minimize the noise she made. She gulped repetitively, pushing back the stomach reflux. She moved into the pantry and noticed the light on.
I really relate to her not liking to be in a house alone. It's kind of funny. I went from my parents' house to my college dorm room to being married. It wasn't until maybe about 3.5 years ago when my kids, I got married again. My kids moved out. They're all adults. 3.5 years ago was probably almost the first time in my life I've ever been alone in a house. And I kept saying to myself, I'm an adult. Why is this so nerve-wracking? And then I realized because in my entire life, I have virtually never been alone in that house. So I really related to that reading. I have to ask, do you have a favorite fictional detective?
Oh, when I was about 12, I used to go to the library all the time. So I went to the library one weekend and I borrowed 22 Agatha Christie's. And I went home and I read all those Agatha Christie. I actually drove myself insane just about. It was a very bad idea. Don't do that. Yes, I really, she really appealed to me. I like, and then there were none. That was my favourite book of hers. I enjoyed how she wrote. I like Michael Robeson. He writes much darker than I do, but I like the fact that his characters have their vulnerabilities. His main character has Parkinson's, and I like that. Well, you use the word quirky. I like that quirk. I like the frailty that we all have. And yeah, no, I'm afraid once you start me, you won't stop me.
That's okay. Now, you write under a pen name, and I think that's a huge discussion among authors. Well, among some, do I or don't I use a pen name? Why did you choose to use a pen name?
I look at it in my world. I have to separate my work from my creative life, because what I do for a living, when you're working with someone in a therapeutic relationship, it's not personal. It's not about me. It's about them. All the emphasis is on understanding them, seeing it from their point of view. So I cannot have I can't be embodied in that. Okay. And so if I don't want them to know of or read my work. It's so I keep it very separate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people struggle with that question depending on their job. I think for a lot of people, it's also, what if I put it out and nobody likes it? But I think there are many reasons people choose a pen name. Now, why did you go with Alice Cadd? Did that come from anywhere or just pop into your head?
Now, look, I wish I had a really sophisticated story. Who was it who I heard? The person who writes Jack Reacher. He decided that he... Yes. He decided to. Your surname has to begin with a C because then you're on the right level in a bookshop. And so I looked for something that was very short and began with C. So that's how I got the Cadd. And my daughter is Alex, and so Alice is a nod to her.
That's neat. I actually do have one book out under a pen name, which I've never actually said publicly before. And I kind of drew the first and last name from people that I admire greatly. So that's where I got mine. And hopefully one day, I've got 15 books of my own under my own name that I'm in the process of working on, but hopefully I'll get back to my pen name. So you love going hiking in a place called Pilbara? Am I even saying that right?
I'm sorry, say that again. I didn't hear you. Oh, Pilbara? Hiking in Pilbara, up in Exmouth, or where are you talking about?
It was spelled Pilabra on your website.
Oh, Pilbara. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, it's called the Pilbara. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Accents can sometimes be difficult. I felt So,
It's our north, it's our northwest. So it would be like saying California. Does that make
okay.
sense? It's a
Mhm.
large area, and it's an area that interests me. And yeah, look, I do an awful lot of camping, and have done really my whole life, and that includes bushwalking and snorkeling, and I really enjoy that sort of thing in my life. And yeah, that's what I was telling you about, being on the
Right.
beach and listening to the humpback sing and things like
So
that. So,
you're a psychiatrist, you write books, you're very physically active, and you're afraid that you're going to fade away or get dementia?
no. I actually think with dementia, you all you can do is the best you can.
Mhm.
And no, I'm not at all worried about fading away. But I want to do the best by my brain, and I'm actually really grateful. I've had a good brain. I'm glad that I've been lucky enough to be able to use it, and I actually think I learned very young to fail. And I think learning to fail and embrace failure was, for me personally, one of the most useful things in
Mhm.
my life.
So what would be an example of learning to fail or embracing failure?
Oh, well, simply with books, when someone gives you a negative review, and then you think, oh, how fortunate, I've learned something about my book. And often you've just learned that it doesn't suit everybody.
Yep.
I mean, I wanted people to read my book, but it's done way better than I expected it to do.
Mhm.
And people have loved it, but not everybody. I've
Right.
learned I'm very much a writer for women is one of the
Mhm.
things that I do. And that makes sense, because what I like is people. And, the structure of a police procedural just it's not my language. I'm not interested in
Mhm.
it. And, if you write an academic paper, everybody will write back to review it and tell you how dumb you are. And then you think, oh, well, good. I've learned a way not to do it. And off you go and you have another go. And I mean, I think
Yep.
that's a real gift. And if I have to dement, then I hope that I do it as gracefully as I possibly can. My
Mhm.
mother has dementia. She's got Parkinson's and quite aggressive dementia. And it's really hard. But she's
Mhm.
also kept underneath her a sense of humor, that she's funny. So she doesn't know who the
Mhm.
hell I am, absolutely no idea. But she says some things, you take her out for coffee and she's looking around the room and you say, how are you going, Mum? She says, oh, I'm casing the joint. Nobody knows who might be in there. And you look at her. And the other day, because she hallucinates, she was having a wonderful discussion with Mary, Queen of Scots, and
Oh,
yelling at
that's great.
Elizabeth for chopping off her
Uh-huh.
head. And I mean, she's joyful, and I hope. I mean, that's not true all the time. And anyone who knows the reality of Alzheimer's, she's very difficult sometimes. But sometimes there's just these little sparks of joy. And I hope that I keep that that I am funny.
Well, I'm not going to name names, but somebody I knew who was older started to probably go into a bit of dementia, started telling tales that she had managed to keep secret for decades. And to me, that was the lesson that I think comes out in your mom's story. You better really have a good character, because you might start saying things that you didn't want people to know. In this case, she was talking about somebody else who had made her keep the secret. But it was a lesson to me. Be careful how you live your life.
There's a person over in your neck of the woods called Irvin Yalom, who's do you know Yalom? Yalom.
I don't think so.
No, he writes a lot of nonfiction, really, about psychiatry. So he's a psychiatrist, and he's actually now writing in his late 80s, and he
Mhm.
is demented. fascinating. And he writes about that experience, and it's and he's very raw. He always writes exactly what it is to him. He's terribly, terribly honest. But he says that he spoke to Rollo May, who is, again, well, he was a psychologist.
Right,
and
I know that name.
And because he went through dementia, and he said to Rollo May, you know, how are you? Because he went to visit him, and he said, actually, it's not too bad. He says, I sit here, this is the day, I've got a lovely view, I've got a cup of tea, I'm fortunate. And I like that. If I can manage that, I'd be very grateful. You don't get to control things in your life. You just don't. Yeah, it'd be lovely if you could, but you really don't get to.
Right. I do want to go back just a little bit to your camping. My first husband was from Ireland, and so his sister lives and works there. And years ago, she took a month-long trip to Australia, and she said every time she turned around, the tour guide was saying, be careful of this, it can kill you. Be careful of that, it can kill you. And by the time she got back to Ireland, she said, I didn't care if mice were running around my table while I ate lunch. I knew they couldn't kill me. And so I'm just curious how, from what I'm told, there's a lot of dangerous stuff in the outback and in the bush in Australia. Do you just learn to recognize that and avoid it? Have you been bitten or?
No, I've never been bitten. And in fact, if you ask most Australians, nobody's been bitten. I mean, you do see snakes, for example. So I live on 10 acres and we've got a dam and we've got sheep. So we do get dugites and tiger snakes who are potentially lethal snakes. But they don't attack you. You know, they're not out to get me. They're terrified of me. So they will only bite me if they have no other options. I mean, it's the same with sharks. Sharks don't want to eat me. They're only going to bite me if it's a mistake. So, you know, if you talk to the average Australian, it just, I don't know, it doesn't feel, I mean, I am way, way more likely to die if I go to America with all your guns than you ever are to die where I am. You know, I mean, you know, you're talking about really rare events. And yes, I would have seen 100 snakes bushwalking, and none of them have bitten me or attacked me or anything like that. It just, that's not how it is. It's we're humans are more dangerous to humans in cars and guns than they ever are in the bush.
Well, see, I've recently, 18 months ago, we moved from northern Minnesota up on the Canadian border, a few hours from there, but close. We moved down to the Appalachians, and all of a sudden, I'm living with poisonous spiders and poisonous snakes, and I actually did get bitten. We also have sheep, and we have New Zealand rabbits, New Zealand white rabbits. Oh, yeah. And I did get bitten by a poisonous spider, and first time in my life, you know, there's nothing poisonous in northern Minnesota. And in fact, in most of Minnesota. So that was kind of news to me. When
I was a little, you know, when I was an intern in the hospitals in the emergency department, somebody got bitten and decided, they need the snake to identify the snake. So he grabbed onto the snake around the head and got in the car with his girlfriend and said, drive me to the hospital. Oh. So they scream up to the hospital with this bloody great big snake. And he stumbled out of his car, walked in the front of the emergency department and dropped the snake on the ground. So the snake goes tunneling down the corridors of the hospital. Oh, it was hilarious. It was so funny. Everybody's jumping up on top of tables and yelling. The men, so the snake was probably terrified. So the men from theatre have big white boots. So they come down, the orderlies, and they're running around after the snake, trying to get it and jump on it. This poor dude's unconscious and everyone's trying to resuscitate him. The moral of the story is we don't need the snake. We can give you anti-venom. You don't need to bring in the snake.
That's good to know.
We ended up getting the zookeeper to come in, and they found the snake hiding in a cupboard. But yeah, no, look, I have been bitten, but certainly not by anything dangerous that's going to kill me. I don't know. I feel very safe in Australia. And I'm not sure that I would in some parts of America.
I'm to the point I don't want to be in a city, that's for sure. I think it has a lot to do with what we're used to and what we're comfortable with. You know, like when my first husband and I first moved out to the Pacific Northwest, we got out there and somebody mentioned, yeah, we have earthquakes in Seattle. And I was just like, oh my gosh, all I could think was, I think it was Planet of the Apes, where the earth is ripping apart and entire houses are falling down into, I was imagining just absolute nightmares. And we had a couple and it was no big deal. I mean, in fact, it was really cool. As I always say, once you realize you're not going to die, they're actually pretty cool. And then when we moved back to Minnesota, where we have tornadoes. I grew up in the military, but I spent my high school years where we have tornadoes. I thought, well, I've never known a single person who's had their house ruined by one, but my kids were just horrified. You're taking us to a place with tornadoes? How could you? We're all going to die.
Where I am, it's actually bushfires. So I've been evacuated probably 4 times with bushfires over the years. And my husband actually grew up in a farming family. So he's very, very competent and has his own firefighting unit. And he works with our neighbour. So they've always got one of the two of them fighting fires. But for me personally, that's when I felt most threatened. So, having to get the kids up in the middle of the night and throw the kids, the bird, the dog, all in the car and go and evacuate somewhere is actually it's frightening. And that for us is probably the equivalent of your tornado. We're lucky in Western Australia; they look after you incredibly well. So all the services work together to take care of you. And I'm actually really grateful for that. But I've evacuated a number of times now. And I
have to ask one more question. It's so interesting hearing your view of the animal life in Australia compared to my sister-in-law's view, or what I would, think. Do kangaroos really punch people, or are they just kind of like other animals? They'll mostly leave you alone. And this is a very, very important question to me, because I'm trying to talk my husband into buying me a kangaroo. And I need to know, should I push a kangaroo or a wallaby?
Oh, okay. Perhaps it's a bit like asking me, will a cow knock me unconscious? In theory, it could, but is it going to? It's highly unlikely. So kangaroos, I mean, obviously they're wildlife, unless they've been trained and raised by humans. They're wildlife. So they could. We have them living in our front garden. They're always getting into my vegetable patch. So I spend half my life pouring chili over my vegetables because they don't like eating chili. We used to have a old kangaroo that lay out the front called Big Bulls. My children called him Big Bulls, and they were always going out to look at him. But I know I don't. Your risk of being punched by a kangaroo is about the same as being head-butted by a cow. It's not highly likely.
Again, that's very interesting, because, when you don't live in a place, you can pick up impressions. And somewhere along the line, I swear I saw, something about how you have to keep your distance, especially from the males, because they will punch you. So, what do I know? And this is why it's so great to talk to people and learn things that they know.
I mean, what I actually think is for your sister-in-law. I actually think that the tour guides think that people come to Australia expecting it to be dangerous and wanting drama. And so they can lay it on a bit thick, if you ask me.
Very interesting. Yeah, it gave her a renewed appreciation. I think she came away from the experience feeling like, I've been worried about a lot of things I didn't really have to be. And I think that's a good lesson for anyone. So we all worry when we don't have to.
I remember we went swimming with the manta rays, which are great big stingrays. They're about, 3 meters. Their wingspan, they're huge. And when we were going in the water, one of the guides said, "Oh, look over there." It was a bit out of the area, but it was a 3-meter tiger shark, and they can be aggressive. And they said, "Oh, well, we'll just keep an eye on it." But if you keep in your lane, you're fine. In fact, one of the amazing things that happened, I wasn't there at the time, but one of the manta rays got entangled in a fishing line with a hook in its eye. And when the boats came around to swim with the manta rays, it recognised one of the leaders, and it came up to him and it stopped, asking him to remove the hook, and it was stayed still while he removed the hook. So, it is just, it's amazing. It's very much worth it.
That's a great story. Yeah. Where can people find you online?
Oh, alicecadd.com, and my book's on Kindle Unlimited.
All right. And are you on social media too?
Yes, I am, under my name, Alice Cadd. So I'm basically on everything. So Facebook, Instagram. Probably the most information is on my website, which is alicecadd.com. I love hearing what people think, and I like to learn. I want to grow and to learn more about all of this. So I'm grateful for any information, any feedback people can give me.
All right. People can find me at booksandbrews.net, lauravosica.com, and our sponsor, gabrielshornpress.com. You can find books by lots of other authors. So I did want to mention, I loved your answer about what you like to drink, Drambuie. I think I've had Drambuie only once in my life, and it was so smooth and so wonderful that I actually wrote a piece of music about it.
Oh, did you?
So it might not look very good for me that I'm writing odes to alcohol, but Drambuie is different. So all I have here is water.
Oh, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. So the only thing where I am, it's 6 a.m.
Right.
So the only thing I'm drinking at the moment is coffee. But yeah, Drambuie Ice is special. It's a lovely thing.
Yeah. Cheers.